As we told you last night at 10, a major fire on Front Street in Morgan City's historic district has destroyed a 122-year-old landmark. The fire broke out about 8 o'clock last night at the two-story wood and brick Shannon Hardware. The video you're now seeing was shot by KBJ TV, Channel 39 in Morgan City, immediately after the fire broke out. The business had been operated since 1872 by one of the city's most prominent families. The business was expanded over the years to include at least 3 Front Street buildings. Now this aerial video you are seeing was shot by TV 10's videographer Marcus Laverne as he flew over the scene in Sky 10 about 40 minutes after the fire broke out. The Morgan City Fire Department was joined by several other firefighters to fight the fire.
A lot of PVC pipe and glue and such. First truck on the scene said the building was totally involved. Our firefighters tried to make an interior attack. We had about 5 or 6 people inside and the whole building flashed over. Forced them back out of the building, and then we went to an exterior attack. The building started to extend to the left. It got into the next building, which is also owned by Shannon's Hardware. We were able to put a combined effort and stop it in the front and the back. At that time, the wind changed and it started reversing and extended into Shannon's building to the right. So far, from what I can tell, it contained to Shannon Hardware's building themselves.
In addition to the firefighters, crew boats on the Atchafalaya River were recruited by the Coast Guard to join in on the fight. By 11 o'clock, the fire was reportedly under control. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries. However, 2 firemen did sustain minor injuries.
History is lost after this fire in Morgan City. Agnes, well, firefighters were still on the scene today in Morgan City after a major fire struck the heart of the city's historic riverfront district. The blaze heavily damaged a century-old business complex operated by one of the city's most prominent families. Ann Myers is just back from the site of that fire. She joins us from the newsroom with an update. Ann?
Well, Bill, the fire destroyed one of Morgan City's oldest businesses, and residents are calling it a tragic loss tonight. Fire officials got the call about 8 o'clock last night that the old Shannon Hardware Company was going up in smoke. More than 50 firefighters worked about 5 hours to get the flames under control. Despite their efforts, the fire destroyed a large chunk of the historic complex. You can see only one riverfront building is left. Family members, the Shannon members, say they're still open for business, but people who have shopped here all their lives are really, really upset about this loss.
I think it's a tragedy. It's one of my favorite hardware stores. I buy a lot of stuff there. We're going to miss it. Of course, I guess they'll come back one of these days and rebuild it.
Now, fire officials believe that the blaze started in the plumbing section of the building, but no word at this point on why it started. Bill?
And witnesses say that it looked like a whole block was on fire. We'll show you the incredible fire that destroyed a historic building.
And you'll be paying. The entire historic district of Morgan City was on fire last night. But what you see blazing is the 2-story wood and brick Shannon Hardware store. The business has been operated since 1872 by one of the city's most prominent families. Thomas Shannon was Morgan City's mayor back at the turn of the century. It took firefighters 3 hours to get the fire under control. 2 of them were slightly injured. Firefighting units were on the scene again today as a precaution as investigators look for a cause. And a member of the Shannon family tells us they will rebuild their hardware store.
In South Louisiana's leading news source, KBJ TV 39, Morgan City.
Welcome to Newsday 39. I'm Monty Danos. Coming up in news tonight, a fire destroys one of Morgan City's oldest businesses in the Riverfront District. Headlining local news, a peaceful evening turned nasty last night as a fire burned one of Morgan City's oldest businesses. Here's the story on the fire that everyone's talking about. The heart of Morgan City's historic Riverfront District in jeopardy last night as fire engulfed a 122-year-old business complex. The fire broke out around 7 o'clock in the 3-building Shannon Hardware store on Front Street. The Morgan City Fire Department was assisted by firefighters from Berwick, Bayou Vista, Patterson, Bell River, and Stevensville. To complicate their efforts, firefighters also had to deal with the closure of the gates of the 22-foot flood wall. A tourist overlook was used to get pumps to the river for water. Large crowds also created control problems for police. This morning, all that remained were the signs of disaster. Now the cleanup begins. Morgan City Assistant Fire Chief Lynn Parker says the main objective was to keep the fire from spreading.
With the structure the way it is, it made it almost impossible to do an interior attack. They went in, tried to make an attack on it, and we actually had a flashover. We had some firemen actually trapped inside the building. They got out, fortunately, okay. So we kind of had to change our tactics and go on a defensive mode. At that point, our primary concern was stopping it from spreading to the buildings on either side, because at one point it looked serious enough that the entire block was in jeopardy.
Once the thriving business district of Morgan City, now all that stands is a hollow shell after a fire gutted through the Shannon Hardware store just last night. Although the business looks completely ruined, owner Dick Shannon is determined to rebuild.
We've been in business here for 120 years, and the whole town burned down in the 1800s, somewhere around last part of the 1800s. So, and it's just like a hurricane. We just come back and just start digging out and just open up again. It's just a little bit more final than a hurricane, that's all. But we'll be open. In fact, we're open for business and taking orders now from a different location.
The hardware store has been in operation since 1872. And if it's up to the Shannon family, despite the fire, their business will remain for years to come.
Good evening. WAFB News is next.
They've been in business for over a century, and now they'll have to start from scratch. I'm George Caldwell in Morgan City. The story's coming up.
11 suspicious fires in a couple of months, and people here in the Kenilworth neighborhood are downright scared. So they're going to do something about it tonight. We'll have that story coming up.
It was just like a hurricane. Those words from the owner of the main business destroyed in the historic Front Street business district of downtown Morgan City. Cause of the fire at this hour, still unknown. WAFB's George Caldwell reports from Morgan City.
You could literally hear the thousands of gallons of water sizzle into steam as it hit the inferno that had been Shannon's Hardware. The 120-year-old business was clearly at loss. Firefighters say it was all they could do not to lose the entire block.
It seemed like we wasn't doing any good. We kept pouring water on it, and it was just immediately turning it to steam and just eating it up.
Firefighters spent close to 6 hours battling the blaze. Many were driven to near exhaustion, 2 taken to local hospitals with minor injuries. One firefighter said with a smirk on his face, quote, "It's been one hell of a month since last night," end quote. And as the blaze raged, the owner of this building was on his way to watch it burn.
When I got to Patterson on the highway, I could see the smoke, and that's 9 miles away. And so I knew it was something bad.
This morning, fire hydrants were still tapped, but it was very clear the water had done little good the night before. It was time to start digging out. Early damage estimates are already over $1 million. All that remains are some hammers hanging in place and plastic buckets that literally melted where they stood. One man who was inside the night before says it's as scared as he's ever been.
The roof was caving in on us. Flames were about 30 feet above our heads. It was real hot.
As workers picked up the pieces, fire officials picked through them. They still haven't found the cause for the blaze, though they don't think it's arson. While Shannon's was a loss, they say they came close to losing the whole block.
It's a combination of lucky break and a lot of hard work. I guess you make your own luck.
And for the owners, they just try to stay optimistic.
And it's just like a hurricane. We just come back and just start digging out and just open up again. It's just a little bit more final than a hurricane, that's all.
Just like a hurricane. Clean up and start over. In Morgan City, George Caldwell, WAFB News.
There's more to this loss than just the business side. We'll hear from the neighbors and the people in Morgan City tonight at 10.
Louisiana's news channel, WAFB.
More people get their news from WAFB News than any other source.
In Morgan City now say an electrical problem in Shannon's Hardware led to the towering blaze which destroyed the 120-year-old business. It all started just before 8 last night at the historic Front Street location, and it took close to 80 men 6 hours to extinguish it. 2 firefighters received minor injuries. For the men putting out the fire, it was a frightening experience.
The roof was caving in on us. Flames were about 30 feet above our heads. It was real hot.
Now comes the long process of tearing down, cleaning up, and rebuilding. Early estimates put repairs somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million. Officials say the faulty electrical equipment is being taken to the state fire marshal's office for a closer look, but they don't expect any charges. They say it all appears to have been a terrible accident.
You know, Shannon's Hardware has been a community gathering place for more than a century in Morgan City. And as firefighters sifted through the store's rubble today, people gathered on the sidewalks to talk about their loss, a piece of their past. WAFB's Finnstrom was there.
Hey, you hate to see that in your community, you know, something like that happen. That's a big business, Shannon Hardware, you know.
When I got to the location and found out what it was just devastating, you know, to see what was happening. And at the time, it seemed like we were going to lose the whole block.
Shannon's Hardware is a family store that's been serving generations of folks here for over 120 years. Dickie Shannon grew up behind its counters. He was the owner firefighters called to the scene yesterday.
When I got to Patterson on the highway, I could see the smoke, and that's 9 miles away. And so I knew it was something bad.
Shannon was relieved to see that the original store itself somehow managed to escape the flames. But the fire did completely gut 2 adjoining buildings that were later added to the structure, a former post office and a dry goods store.
Besides the loss to the family, to the district, it means a loss of 2 buildings with a great long history behind it.
As if last night's loss wasn't enough, just 2 years ago, the Shannon family lost a home on this piece of property to flames. It was filled with family heirlooms and memories. Dickie Shannon says he has lost a lot of his family's history, but says this family store has seen its way through hurricanes, floods, and even a previous fire. He says he plans to rebuild this structure that historians say first opened its doors to a dirt road back in 1872.
It was founded by Thomas Shannon, whose family immigrated from Ireland in 1849. He arrived in the area in 1867 and opened the establishment in 1872. It's been run by family members since that time and at the same spot. So we're all very devastated by this loss.
Of course, rebuilding won't be easy, but the youngest Shannon, Casey Shannon, says they'll do it as they have in the past, with the help of friends.
A lot of people last night were bringing ice and sodas to the firemen, and 7 different community fire departments came and helped out, and I just wanted to thank everyone for helping out.
In Morgan City, Finnstrom, WAFB News.
Officials with the city's historic commission say there is good news in all this. Various grants and funding will be available since the store is in a recognized historic district.